Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Matt the Family Guy, Kent the Cat Guy, Jacqueline from JP Mint, and Greg the Single Guy, bringing you episodes from around the world about the best kept secret in education. You've got it, international teaching. Welcome to the show. All right, welcome everybody. This is Greg from the ITP, and I have JP Mint as usual. Kent is asleep. I think it's too early for him. How you doing, JP?
I'm doing great. 9 p.m. on a Friday night. Kent is out, like you say, 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I don't blame him. But we have a friend of yours this time, Greg. I'm excited. I can't believe you actually had friends.
I can't either. Yeah, from a long time ago. I do want to introduce her. She's coming to us from Perth right now, and this is Emily Cave. Emily, how are you doing this morning?
I'm great. It's really good to see your face again, Greg. And Jacqueline and I have been having a great chat so far. So great to talk
All
to
the
you guys.
good stuff, bad stuff.
I should point out to fellow listeners from Ontario, Canada, that this is Perth, Australia, because there is a Perth, Ontario, Canada, right close to Ottawa. But this is the original Perth, I bet you. Or maybe Perth is from the UK, but
I think there's actually a Perth in Scotland, and I don't know which one came first, but I'm gonna assume it was the one in Scotland.
This one's a little farther right of Canada than Scotland, though. This is the Perth in Australia, right,
Turn
JP?
right.
Yeah.
Well, and our astute listeners are going to say, wait a second, Emily doesn't sound Australian. So, Emily, can you give us an elevator version of how you've ended up in Australia?
Sure. Well, I'm from the U.S. My dad was in the Army, so I don't necessarily have a particular hometown. I became an international teacher after about 6 years of teaching in the U.S. and I've lived overseas now for 15 years. My last job was in China. I was a head of school there in Shenzhen, and I decided to take a year off and ended up doing consulting work with Schrole, and they happened to be located in Perth. So I went from doing a little bit of consulting to 100% time and moved myself over here and thought I'd see what it was like to relocate to an English-speaking country for once. Found out they don't really speak English here.
I can't wait to dive into all the cultural shock because, yeah, you're right. I mean, entering an English space, you'd be thinking, yeah, there's not going to be any culture shock, but I know you've got some stories. So that is exciting. But you knew Greg in Venezuela, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, actually, I met Greg in Iowa, and it's one of my favorite stories about how we were both at the, was my first international teaching fair at the University of Northern Iowa. And Greg was a pro.
Not that kind of pro, JP. No, that kind of pro.
That was his like fourth or fifth. How long was it? Like fourth or fifth? Your fourth or fifth uni? UNI?
Mine,
wasn't it, Greg?
Probably my third uni fair. And anyway, I sat down next to Emily. I chose the most beautiful woman in the room, sat down next to her, and she's looking at the same school I was. And our superintendent had reached out, sort of headhunted both of us. That was his style. He would go to the fair with a couple people in mind and target those people before the fair. And I didn't know this. I had just flown in. So Emily had already talked to the superintendent the night before, I believe, right?
Yep, I had, yep.
But she had like a stack of invites, which I never had. She had a stack of invites that time.
Emily, what were you teaching or doing at that time that you had this stack?
Yeah, so I was a reading recovery teacher and Title I teacher, which is reading. So I was a reading specialist essentially, and I had my master's degree. So I think now that I've done recruiting myself, I realized that I was a gem. I had no idea, right? Because I was leaving Iowa City feeling like my career was going to go nowhere. And I, walk into this fair thinking, oh, I'll just see what's going on there. And like, schools from all over the world were saying, we want you. And I couldn't believe it. But now I know, 6 years experience, reading specializations up the wazoo and a master's degree. That was gold. I had no idea.
And not to mention the US citizenship opens up a lot of doors. So I mean the right nationality. And let's ask, were you also single without dependents?
Correct.
There you go. That's the other golden ticket, right? Like just sort of the cheapest package. You're not bringing a trailing spouse, you're not bringing 3 or 4 kids. So
That's
yeah,
right.
fantastic. And so tell us a little bit about that Northern or Uni, the what is it called? The
University of
University of
Northern
Northern
Iowa
Iowa.
Fair.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Tell us about the UNI fair, that first one then.
Yeah, that fair is really great because there's, it's hosted. It was actually I don't know if you guys, I know Greg probably knows this. It was the one that kicked off the whole idea of international teacher job fairs. They started back in the early 70s, I think, and mid 70s. So yeah, that one is just got hundreds of schools, right? The most, I think, representation from around the globe. And there were so many people. And here I was, this little teacher in Iowa, just wide-eyed and scared to death. And there were all these other teachers, I'm sure Greg remembers, that were like, they were very intense. I just remember sitting at this table full of people who were talking about different schools, and they're getting all intense with each other, and Greg comes over and just sits down and calms everyone down, and he's walking around saying hi to people, and he knows everyone, and he sits at the table and he goes, "Oh, what are you guys looking at?" And he just starts asking questions in a way that calmed everyone. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. This guy knows what he's doing. So I just kind of watched him a bit. And then I don't remember how we started talking, Greg, but
I think
we
we just
figured out.
Yeah, we just saw. I think I saw that you were looking at the school, or I asked you what schools you're looking at, because it's a real safe question with other people. You don't know.
That's right.
Just say, Who are you looking at?" Because that's brings everyone together. Like, what are you interested in? Maybe I can help. I've heard of this school. You've heard of this school, and we could sort of trade information. Right? That's really what
Yep.
it was. It's a very easy way of talking to people at a job fair. You don't
Yep.
intrude that way, right? And
Yep.
you're right; it was really intense. That is an intense 3 days, because it's like a Friday evening, Friday morning, Saturday, and then by Sunday everybody's on a flight. So
Yep.
that's a tough fare. It really is.
I know. And you do back-to-back interviews because you don't want to miss out on a conversation with a school. So, I just remember going from room to room or table to table, depending. So sometimes there were hotel rooms, sometimes they were at a table in the conference area. So wherever we could meet. And I still have, and I need to find it, I still have my notebook of all my notes from those interviews.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
kept
just,
mine as well.
yeah,
I all my job fair notes because I felt like, well, first of all, it's analog. Like I don't have any digital copies of these, but
that's
I feel
right.
like I don't know. I might look at it someday and say, what was that school like back in the 2000s or the
And the
knots or something?
contacts you make, right?
Yeah,
The
yeah,
names of the
absolutely.
contacts. I
I
saw
should
someone
go
on
back
LinkedIn the
through
other day
those.
and said, "Wow, well, JP, I thought you're the kind of person that sits in meetings and just keeps track of your contacts, because that's a very important networking tool, right? These
I
names and these
should. I should go
schools."
back through those and start adding on LinkedIn because I'm sure these people are still in the biz.
Oh, one thing I did, and I'm really glad I did. I had a connection with a woman that I interviewed with, and at the time she was at the American School Foundation Monterey in Mexico. Her name is Sonia Keller, and I just loved talking with her. I really did. And I was tempted to take that job, but Mike had swayed me over to the job in Venezuela. But I stayed in touch with Sonia. Every now and then, I would just send her an email and say, "I still remember our conversation at that fair. Here's what I'm doing now. What are you up to?" And I still see her. So I see her at international school events like the AAIE conference each year. And we had one conversation once in 2008 or 2007, and we still see each other and remember one another. And I think that it's just it's so cool. I haven't forgot her.
Well, because the reconnection each year. So you're not really
Hmm.
basing your friendship off of one conversation so many years ago, but the fact that you keep reconnecting and you keep reaching out, and she as well reaches out and sees you at conferences. But
Hmm.
I love how small the world is, and I think we're always saying that, Greg, that this is the smallest district in the world is the world.
You keep
But
running into people. Don't
there's
burn
just that
bridges.
cycle, and a lot of people know, one person, and then it just snowballs.
That's right.
So then, can you tell us a little bit about, and oh well, let's just put the elephant in the room. How do you pronounce Schrole? Because I've heard it pronounced so many different ways.
Yeah. And just so you know, the school of thought is that if you prefer a way to pronounce it and it helps you remember, then, nobody's going to give you a hard time. But the name comes from um, two words together, school and roll. And so the
Ah.
SCH is, it's pronounced scroll.
I win the bet. See, JP, you didn't believe me. I knew it was scroll. You said you're calling it
I'm like, I think
scroll.
it's
You thought it was
Schroll. I thought it
Scrolly
was
or something.
Schroll.
I
No,
know.
I
I love
never
it.
said
I love
Scrolly.
it
That
when
sounds
people
Italian.
pronounce it with like a German accent, like Schrola.
Schroll. Well, that almost sounds
My
Swedish. Yeah.
Sharola.
Okay,
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah.
can you tell us what's it like working over at Scroll? And I mean, is it, well, I even picture like a Google campus, you've got ping pong tables and video arcades, or is it something so fun like that? Or is it very cut and dry? Everyone has a cubicle?
It's a little bit of both, actually. So, it's an office space where it's open. So they're kind of cubically, but it's very open. So I can see everybody, they can see me, which was very hard for me to adjust to, actually, after having my own office for so many years. But it's not, I mean, I always had my door open anyways, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but it's just different when you're sitting next to somebody who's having conversations. But we have like a little balcony with a barbecue and, that game Cornhole where you toss the bean bags to the wooden platform. We've done that a few times, but no ping pong tables or hijinks inside the office necessarily. But it's pretty laid back. So there's a wine fridge and there's beer in the fridge and stuff like that. And usually on like a Friday around 3 o'clock, you'll see our software developers sitting around a table, all having a beer, just chatting and ending the week, which is kind of nice and totally different from a school environment. But I mean, otherwise, one of the things I like about it is I'm learning about business for starters, but it's also there's conversations happening around about schools and about things that are happening at schools from people who are a little bit outside that school environment. I'm one of the two real subject matter experts, they call, like people who are actually educators and have been in the business ourselves. But it's such a good perspective, actually, to have the naive questions sometimes from the salespeople or the account managers or the software developers who are saying, so if I'm posting a job and I want to describe it in this way, what does that mean to you? And because they get a question maybe from a school and they want to know why is the school asking that question, and then I kind of help build the context around it more, because a lot of times a customer or a client will assume everything they know, but you don't have their same context.
You're the school whisperer. You know the language, you know the context, and so you're needing to translate that. That's so cool.
Well, she's like you,
Yeah.
JP, because before she got to Scroll, she started out teaching and then she went to principal and then she went to superintendent or head of school, just into admin, just like you. So she's had that chance to see different schools from different perspectives all along the line. When we met, we were both teachers, and I'm still just a teacher, but she's moved up and gone along. So I think that's great. Both of you have experience in admin and teaching, and then Emily has gone into the recruitment too, and I think that's fascinating. That's why I really wanted her on the show, you have so many perspectives we could talk about.
Yeah. Actually, I have learned in this whole process that one of my favorite things to do is the recruiting in terms of talking with teachers and helping like find people for jobs. One of the things I'm doing now is building up a recruitment side of things for Scroll, where we do more executive searches, so helping schools find their next principal or head of school. So we've done a little bit of that, but not advertised it. And now I'm looking at launching that more openly, because I found I just love looking through the database and seeing people's career histories and telling myself their story, like, oh, so they did this and then they did that, and sort of, and then meeting that person and talking with them and finding out what their passions are about education and where they want to be next and why.
See, I know you guys are both alike. You're both cut
Yeah, I
from the
was gonna
same cloth.
say
JP does it from the
you're
teacher
preaching to
point
the
of view.
choir over here.
Yeah.
I love diving into a CV, finding all their strengths and like extracting those and pulling out their unique qualities, because I mean, when it comes down to it, if everyone is a teacher and they've all taught, this many years in these schools, how do you find those nuggets of gold? But by first doing a deep dive on their CV, but then also talking. So you do video calls with candidates then.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm supporting a recruitment process, yeah, I would. But just as a head of school, which was growing every year, we were adding new grade levels. So every year, I was recruiting massive amounts of teachers. I was doing 200 interviews easily a year. So it was a huge part of my job. I would say 80% of my job was actually recruiting because we were building the school. Yeah, and I loved it, and it, like you guys say, you run into people again, right? You never know who you're going to see again. And Mike Martell, who hired Greg and I for the job in Venezuela, had given me that advice when I left. He said, Emily, every interview you have with a potential teacher is an opportunity for branding and for helping them remember who you are and what kind of leader you are, and they may want to work for you at another time. So you never leave that relationship not cared for. And I think it's absolutely true. I have one of my favorite stories actually was doing an online fair, and there was a teacher who was brand new. She had just gotten her teaching certificate. She didn't have a lot of licensed teaching experience, but we all know that doesn't mean that she didn't have opportunities, right? And she did. She had great opportunities in her CV, and she wanted to talk, and I couldn't. I was my hands were tied, like many schools. Because of visas, I couldn't even interview somebody who didn't have at least 2 years experience. And she just looked so crestfallen. And I said, "So have you had any interviews with anyone?" And she said, "No." So I invited her to do a practice interview with me, and we did the practice interview, and I gave her feedback on how she wasn't selling herself. I said, here are the, like you said, Jacqueline, the gems in her CV. And I said, but when you talked about it, you really didn't show what you've actually done. You can talk about it like this. And then I ran into her at another face-to-face hiring fair, and I didn't remember her name. She remembered mine, right? Goes, that Emily, oh my gosh, I've got 8 job offers. I'm so excited, and she was doing really well. And she remembered me, and she talked about me to other candidates that were at that fair. So that helped me actually find teachers as well, just by being a nice person.
Well, because so many times we're not getting the feedback of why not me. And so for you to have taken the time to work out on her skills, I mean, I've never heard of that. Greg, have you ever heard of a head trying to help somebody that they can't obviously hire, but then, well, think about it this way or try this?
Yeah, and it goes both ways. I mean, I remember the last recruiting fair that I went to, I ended up speaking for like 2 hours with a school head after all the recruiting was pretty much done on the final day. We sat in the lobby, and he wanted to know more about my school and about opportunities, and we ended up talking about retirement. And he hadn't even thought about retirement. He's like, happily in Morocco. And he's like, oh my God, you're right, Greg. I probably only have one more school before I really have to think about how retirement is going to affect my ability to recruit for myself. And we ended up but on the other hand, I've had a lot of directors that have sat down at some point in the longer, especially the longer interviews, and after saying, I can't accept your position, where they're like, well, let's talk about this, and they sort of help out. And if they don't hire you, I've had experiences where they don't hire me and they say why, and build this up later and talk to me in a few years, something like that, right? So yeah,
Hmm.
both sides. I've seen that both kind of conversation. I'll never forget interviewing with a school in Surabaya, Indonesia. That's one of these coal mining schools. It's a company school, and you get like, it was a package back in the day. It was like 65,000. It was 3 or 4 times more than base salary than other schools, and they had an opening for, I don't know, for elementary social studies, and I had like 3 years of teaching already, and I sat down with this guy and I was like, oh, I'm going to go for the money. And I didn't even know about where the school was. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, I sat down with him, and he looks at me at the end of the first or second interview, and he looks at me, he goes, Greg, I would be honest with you. I could get somebody for this kind of a pay. I could get somebody that has 20 years of teaching elementary, just social studies. So come and see me after a few years, right? And
Mm.
I'm sure, Emily, you said that to people before. You just don't have enough experience. Like the woman you're talking about, she didn't have enough license time in front of kids to actually hire. But you have a great conversation, and you probably changed her life by giving her that kind of advice, right?
Yeah, it's, I think I've seen you, Greg, help people out at the fairs, and it's just that, we're all teachers, so we
Yeah.
like to help people, and seeing how, I just didn't want her to walk away feeling rejected, because that's not the kind of community we are in international schools. And so, and I do feel like every one of us has a role in furthering who we are as a school, international school community, and everything we do feeds back into that community. So as a school leader, if we create a great environment where people thrive and they become better at what they're doing, then when they do go back into that job market, we've just contributed to a stronger teacher who's going to then go and contribute even better in international communities. We perpetuate that, And I've done a big project with Scroll actually about onboarding for that same reason. How we come into a school, how we get started, and how we are supported to be successful in those first months is really an important part of that process of then how that candidate comes back into the pool of, of teachers.
So you're talking about onboarding into Scroll.
No, I think
No,
PDs for schools, right? Where you're helping schools with their onboarding process.
yeah, well, what Scroll did actually was, so I give a talk at international conferences about it, but what Scroll did, and I don't manage that side of it, but they just did I guess a part of their platform now has what they call Engage, and it allows for onboarding new teachers. So once they get hired, then there's a whole sort of standardized process to help bring them onto, including all of the visa procedures and paperworks and documentation, just to help organize that teacher and get them on the right foot and have them not miss. I can't tell you how many schools I've heard of, like especially in Saudi Arabia for some reason, that have teachers not make it to the start date. Like they don't show up in the country, and things have just fallen through the cracks between communications and whatever from when they were hired to actually arriving to the school. And that means that there's some young teachers out there who got jobs, were excited about going overseas, and then something happened and it soured, or they didn't make it, and then how are they feeling? What are they doing? Are they still teaching? Are they still interested in teaching? Just, we need to help our profession.
And some schools, you land as a teacher maybe in a cohort, maybe not. You land. There's stories about landing and just not having anybody meet you at the airport. Like you're in the
That's
middle of
right.
nowhere, you don't speak the language, and you're supposed to find a taxi to get you to some address, and you're not really sure. And on the other side of that, we have the schools that are really good at onboarding, where they show up and they have their own visa stamp at the airport, or they come and get you in a bus, take you shopping, get you settled in. You meet your superintendent right at the airport. I'm a big
Hmm.
fan. I don't know about you, Emily, but I'm a big fan of having schools send the person that does the recruiting. If it's a principal with a superintendent, those are the two faces that they see hopefully at the airport when they arrive. There's such a feeling about that. I don't know if you guys had that experience before, if you do it that way, but that is priceless because that's a
Yep.
connection you made, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's the person you sort of imprinted on, right? When you took the job. One of
Wait,
the,
is
you
that
know
a
what?
Twilight connection?
It's
Or
like,
is that another? Wait, am I showing my true colors? Because I'm thinking of imprinting is when you're mates for life. But no, I totally get it. That's the person that you've hit it off with and made a
yes.
connection with.
Yeah.
And that's
That's
not always
right.
possible, but you can try. Sometimes we
Yeah.
have some recruiters or a superintendent or a head of school is recruiting that year and gets the new cohort hired, and yet they're going to a new school themselves. So maybe they can't be the one. But whoever's communicating with the new staff that's coming in might be the ones that they meet at the airport. But
Yeah.
anyway, I love that you're doing that with Scroll. I think that that's really important, or that Scroll is doing that. I love that fact. They're doing recruiting fairs too, right? Scroll is or no?
Yeah,
Oh,
mostly
are they?
there's online, so there's always been the online
Hmm.
events. And then what we did, which was sort of out of the box for Scroll, I think they meant to always only be online, but after COVID, several of the heads of school were saying, we'd really like to have some opportunities to just be around people again. Can you do an in-person event? And so we said, yeah, let's do it. We said, but if we're going to do it, we're going to do it differently. And so we did it really early with the idea of this is just about starting conversations. This is not a pressure situation. So like what Greg and I talked about, that hiring fair and you and I is in February, I think. And it's
Emotional
nowadays
roller coaster.
it's
Yeah.
later in the hiring season. You want to know that you're going to have a job. You don't know what's going to happen next. So what we did is we started an in-person one, and it's in Bangkok each year in October. So this coming October will be the third one. I won't be there, but I was there for the first two, and I tended to get up and talk and say, like, look, this is about meeting each other, setting the stage, having a conversation. You've got a whole cycle of recruitment opportunities ahead of you, but here's where you can actually get yourself out there, talk to schools, and have a chance to talk in a no pressure situation. So you didn't, and we did. We saw that people. We did kind of like a World Cafe setting where everybody was out at tables. There was no separate rooms, things like that, and people were really relaxed. It was quite nice, and nobody felt like they needed to accept a job, and nobody felt like they needed to be making offers by the end of that time. But it was a lot like what actually I think some of my best hiring moments were, where I met somebody at a hiring fair early on. We continued to see who else was out there. And then I thought, you know what? I remember that guy I had a really good conversation with about barbecue joints, and I wonder if he's still available. Get in touch with him. And yep, sure enough, he was just waiting for that call from us, and hired him months after that first meeting.
That's awesome.
So the candidates and the heads of school come
Hmm.
to this. Do you call it a job fair? What do you call it?
We call it a recruitment and networking event.
Mm.
That's a huge word change right there. Instead of an international recruiting fair or educator recruiting fair, calling it networking, that's really cool. And it's a
Yeah.
different take on it, like you were saying. So it takes the pressure off that emotional roller coaster of the UNI fair. Like you said, they've been doing it for almost 50 years now. And for Scroll to
Wow.
come out and do that, I love it. And ISS does their fairs, and all these other companies that do fairs, even in the Canuckies, even in Canada, you guys do a fair, right? Queens.
Oh,
And I
Yeah,
yeah.
so Queens is now
with
joined with
Search
Search
Associates.
Associates, and
Yeah.
they did the
Oh,
Toronto
cool.
one.
And that's with Gary McPhee. He had the Toronto Fair. That's
And
great.
Ron Sparks. Yeah.
Yeah, Ray.
And
I think
there's
it's
the
Ray.
But
ASA Fair, which turned into the MISA now. The
Mm-hmm.
South American
Amisa.
schools have their own
Oh,
fair.
yeah.
So there's a lot of different fairs that Scroll has put their hat in the ring with as far as face-to-face fairs. I know that certain fairs have been online for years, even before COVID, but then, of course,
Mm-hmm.
COVID hit. Everything was remote. All right, let's take a moment for a little commercial about how to get in touch with us. You can, of course, find all four of us at the itpexpat.com. That's www.itpexpat.com.
Or you could also find us at email at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
or if you're into Facebook, we have a new Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/ITPexpat, where you can find all kinds of inside information about ITP Expat.
You can also find us on Instagram at ITPXpats. That's with an S. ITPXpats is our handle.
All right, and thank you, listeners. We have over 100 countries represented by our listeners, and though we're not monetized, we are here for you, and we would like to thank all of you for listening. So let's get back to the show. Emily, can you back me up on one thing? I think you can. My favorite advice for people is to find a way to get to one of the face-to-face fairs. Just because you meet somebody face-to-face, it's different than even a video, right? You get to read
Yeah.
the et cetera. It's a whole different experience. Do you agree?
I agree. I think that for a teacher, for one thing, if you're a teacher, you're already working usually, right? So if you do all the online fairs, you're probably trying to work out a way that you're not taking any time away from school.
And save
And
money.
so you're really overloading yourself. And there's a lot of online fairs. And one of my former teachers, I remember he told me it was frustrating for him because with all these different online fairs, all the different schools, you have all these different timelines. Everybody's working on their own cycle. And he said he felt like he was juggling thousands of different timelines between all the schools he was talking to and all of the different events he was managing. And he was trying not to take any time away from work. This was actually during COVID, so there were no face-to-face at the time. And he was saying, I wish there was another face-to-face I could go to because I could just take the time, be focused, do only that, talk to schools, find out what their timeline is, and just sort of create my own sort of window of where I want to have a decision made. And so there is something to be said, even just from your mental well-being, for narrowing things down and saying, I'm definitely going to have a face-to-face moment here. And I think candidates probably, with all the options that are out there, need to start taking a bit more control themselves on how they want to look and when they, and I absolutely agree. The face-to-face just, for me, my schools were always a small school, and I didn't have a big brand, a big name. So I wasn't going to have candidates coming out and reaching out to us. I needed to get in front of them, because if I could get in front of them, I could charm them and get them to say, oh, I want to work with her. And that was for me, I needed it. So that, as a school, and you may find you find out that you go there, you have a conversation face to face with the school leader, and you think, I really want to work with that person. And you won't always get that online.
My biggest thing was networking, being able to meet other candidates, even just go around the, whatever it was, like a ballroom or the big conference room, and just say hello to people. You see a country, you see the city or the school name in the country, and you think, oh, I visited that country once. Let me just go chat with them for a little bit about the city that they happen to be in, and not even anything to do with, the fact that they have an opening or don't. And I just love, because we're all, as you say, we're all educators. We all started out as teachers, and we all want to help each other if it comes down to information or giving tips, or, hey, I'm going to your city in a couple weeks. Have you got any tips for a restaurant? Or, I'm looking for this kind of activity. And because we also love traveling, so we're all tourists in our own city and the cities that we live in. So I love the opportunity of those face-to-face conversations.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And if you ever do just sort of sit back and watch, you notice that the teachers really do network with each other, create little social groups. I mean, even during that busy time, you'll see teachers forming up little groups to go out for a dinner. Greg and I had wings in the bar and at UNI, right? We shared some food and drinks while we tried to make our decisions. And it was really helpful to have that camaraderie and as you say, advice from people who have been to different places, or even just don't be worried about what you see on the news. That those news stories may be true, but here's what daily life is really like in that country.
Yeah, it's also attaboys and attagirls, right? Because you're all on this emotional roller coaster because there are really stressful sometimes for people. People, like you've said, Emily, they're very stressed during these quick job fairs. And just
Yeah.
having that person come in the hallway and say, "Hey, how you doing? Did you talk to these guys yet?" Or, "Yep, I just did that one. That was pretty cool." And an attaboy, a little pat on the back, an attagirl, those are important during that time because you know that somebody else is doing what you're doing. They're feeling what you're feeling. It's empathy. And
Yep.
it's great. And the thing is, what I like best about any kind of job fair, whether it's online or even if it's in person, especially in person, is that the directors, those of you that are in admin, you're out talking to the candidates too, and it's not about hiring them; it's about helping them. So the candidates have a chance in the elevator, or if it's at, having wings in the bar or something. A head of school might talk to you about working in Africa. You never thought
Mhm.
about working in Africa, and you fall for these stories, and it's incredible when you can hear these stories of these people that have been in schools around the world, right?
Mhm. Yep. And sometimes I think you see yourself in some of the people that you talk to, and you realize, well, they're really happy in that place. These are the things you hear them talk about, what they've gotten, attracted to about that country, or the things that they have found to do in their own leisure time, and you realize, oh, those are things I like to do, and I'd be really happy in that place. I'd never imagined that, you know some Lesotho, Africa would be where I'd want to move to, but turns out I could be happy there because so and so is.
We just had a guest that was living in Bangladesh, right? JP, we just interviewed your friend, and she was telling us all about the cool things of Bangladesh once you get outside of Dhaka, where the big city is, and there's rivers and there's all these beautiful places to go, and you don't hear a lot about that from Bangladesh. Media doesn't treat them very well, but hearing it from her was a really key part of finding out what else is about besides media, what else is about that country or that school that they're working in. So yeah, that's huge.
So, Emily, while we have you, can we pick your brain about how can we put our best foot forward when we're applying for a job? Because I know a lot of our listeners, maybe at this point, they're not thinking about recruiting right now, but it's going to be someday. It might be happening in the fall or something. But what are some tips you can give our listeners?
Yeah, I've actually done a session on this with a colleague of mine. We call it putting your best foot forward. and,
Yay!
And a lot of the things we talk about are, as you get started, think about who you are. Think about, who you are, why you do what you do, and what it is you're looking for, so that you do sort of create that, I guess, profile for yourself of what you want to do next, so that you can recognize those opportunities that you most are interested in when they do come along. I think sometimes what people do is they get caught in a bad cycle. So they make a decision to go somewhere, but they haven't really narrowed down what they want to have happen next in their career. And so they then struggle to find that right position, and then they get scared and they just take a job. And then that may not be the right one. They're not happy, they're not fulfilled, they don't feel successful. And then they think, I got to get out of this. And then they go and they try and take another job. And it's just a really badly perpetuating cycle. So just sort of doing their preparation, and what my colleague Sam says is, just think of like 3 main bullet points. Who am I? What do I want to do? And, why? Where do I want to go? Or when do I want to do it? And what's that look like? I can't remember what his 3 bullet points are actually, but it's along those lines.
Those sounded good.
But yeah, self-examine and clarify your situation. I loved how you said it, so that you can recognize it when you see it.
That's right. Yeah. And, we, as educators, we're always sort of in the weeds of what it is that we're doing. And we're sometimes so passionate about our job that it's really hard to step out of that for a minute and take like an objective view of yourself, and to think about what you want to do, and then also to sell yourself, right? We're not salespeople. We're not marketers. We don't know how to talk that talk, and it feels awkward, and it can feel inauthentic, even though it's real, even though you did, get an award, or your students did have those great results. It can feel awkward when you talk about it, like it's like, like you're not being humble or something, but it's what's needed, right? So a school needs to know what are the, not only what you did, but what were the results. So I think there's kind of 2 ways that people talk about that, right? They talk about like, this is your CV, but then what was the impact of your presence in the school by being there? And the other way to think about that is when you answer a question in an interview, are you giving the details? Are you giving real details that help that interviewer see what you're like as a teacher? So when you talk about that great project you did with your 4th graders, it's not just about the project. It's about what happened in the learning. So what did those 4th graders do? How did they change because of that project? And most of the time, that's all it takes for a teacher to get into that natural zone, and they start talking about their kids, what their kids were struggling with, and then what they got better at. And before you know it, they're glowing. You can see exactly who they are as a teacher. So I think it goes both ways. 1, it helps you sell yourself, and 2, it helps you relax and actually just be yourself. So that's my
And you
best
can
piece of
see the
advice.
passion, right? You can see the passion they have for teaching when they start talking about something that's personal to them, a personal example. And their eyes light up, and they just start, as you say, they just start glowing. That's what you're trying to drive at every time you have an interview with someone, is to get to the essence of who they are, rather than those pat answers that seem almost rehearsed with the jargon or the lingo that that we're using lately. What we want to hear is, who are you essentially, and what drives you to be a teacher.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And there's definitely, some schools who they want to hear that right lingo. They want to hear the right answers. They want to know that certain things, and that's okay. They also want to know who you are as a teacher, that what kind of person are you going to be. And in general, anywhere you are, I think whatever the job is that you're doing, pay attention to doing the best that you can in the moment that you're there, because just because you may have decided you're going somewhere else doesn't mean that what you're doing now doesn't matter. And what you do now is only going to help you be a better teacher in that next job. So I think it can be very tempting to think, oh, things aren't working out for me, I'm not doing well, and then you stop trying. And then you're just reinforcing bad practice for yourself. And then how are you going to get out of that in your next position? So never stop trying to improve, never stop trying to be the best teacher you can, because that actually will help you even in an interview. You can say, here's my current challenge. It's really difficult in this job I'm doing. Here are all the things I'm doing that I know are best practices to try and make it better. So then you're not focused on negatives either. You can still talk about a challenge at your current job when they say, why are you leaving? You don't have to like throw mud on your current job, but you can talk about the challenges, and you can talk about it in a productive way by focusing on all of the things that you are trying as a teacher who wants to be giving their best, and it will be authentic.
One of my favorite things, and this is bouncing off what you just said, Emily, is my favorite part of the job is when I go on to my next job. So if I have 6 months out and I find a new school, that last 3 or 4 months is a chance to shine, because you don't have to worry about finding a job. You have one, it's in the bag, and you're ready. So leave a good mark on that school and leave with a big party, you know?
Yes.
Yes, leave with a big party, and really make sure that you make an impact on your students and your staff as you're leaving, and leave this legacy of happiness. Wow, they're going to talk about that teacher when you're gone, because in a good way, because you're going to end up with them later, and you want to leave that school in a good place rather than just turn everything off and just say, whatever, I've got a new job. So that's my little word of advice, bouncing off of what you said. Getting that early job for the next position, you leave and you have plenty of time to make a difference still.
That's right. I was actually remembering that, Greg, about you this morning as I was thinking about doing this podcast, is that one of the things I learned from you was that party at the end when you go. And I was thinking that actually one of my fondest memories, now that I think about it, of being an international teacher is the party I threw when I left Venezuela. And I'm sad that you weren't there, but I learned it from you, Greg. I threw the biggest party you can imagine. It's easy to have a party in Venezuela. It's not expensive. You can have catering and waiters, and one of our students' moms was an event planner, so she organized it. We had furniture brought into this place. We rented out this multi-level outdoor space. The music teacher was dating a guy who was this amazing violinist at the Philharmonic, and he had a quartet that came and played. Every
Wow.
member of the school was invited, right? The bus drivers, the security guards, the lunch ladies, everyone was there. Teachers, the head of school, every single member of the community was there. It was this huge party, and it didn't cost me that much money, but I was so happy to do it, and we had such a great night. I still think about it. And it was a great way to leave with a good feeling. And I definitely got the idea from you.
Well, I didn't know that. Thank you. I'm glad. I feel like my little girl's growing up. She learned something, right? Matt Judd and I, if you remember, Emily, Matt Judd and I have the same birthday day, and Tara too. We still keep in touch with our birthday times. And Matt and I always go to we always have a cheesesteak factory with his whole family, and they invite Uncle Greg. But that was the cool thing about those parties, was bringing people together. And Matt and I, after starting this podcast together, it was so cool because we just do our birthday once in a while too. But yeah, I'm glad you did such a huge party. I hope that the maintenance was doing all the barbecue for you. I still have fond memories. That was many years ago. The cleaning ladies, I remember they cleaned up my apartment. They're like, Greg, Goyo, just go. So to have that whole party for the school, and including the staff, including the bus drivers, it's just phenomenal feeling, isn't it, Emily?
Yeah.
When you do that, you leave on such a high note, and they'll remember you for the rest of their lives that you did that for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great. I'll never forget it.
So, speaking of leaving,
Yeah.
are there three things that you like to take with you every time you move to a new country? Or are there three things you need in that country to feel comfortable?
That's good. Ooh, you guys didn't tell me this at all in advance. That's sneaky. One of the things that I think is interesting that I have had with me everywhere I go is my reading recovery books. I've ended up using them in every country as well. So it's if you've done reading recovery training, then you know what I'm talking about. It's essentially like guidebooks for a teacher with a lot of research and information and just I have used my reading recovery tools to help diagnose what's going on with the student in reading. And I know that sounds silly, but I guess that's the
Not
teacher
silly at
in
all.
me. So that for sure. I don't know if it's been the same thing, but one thing I always make sure that I bring of my own are bed linens and kitchen towels because those are what make me feel like I'm in my own home, even when all of the furniture is new and different, and it's just I don't tend to like a lot. I think a lot of people do this, which is a really nice thing, is people will put up photos of their own family, and I don't tend to have pictures of myself or my family around, but I just have those homey things like the bed linens and the kitchen towels or tea towels. Those have seemed to make a difference for me every time. And the third thing, gosh,
Is there something that you need in the country? Like one of our listeners said, I just need a place to run. Like as long as I have a place that I can safely run. So is there something you need in the new country that makes you feel like you're home?
yeah, that's a good one. I think it would have.
It's not a
I,
test. You don't get a grade on this.
yeah,
You don't have
no,
to worry
yeah.
about a third one.
I mean, I do think it would have to be just knowing where to buy those things that you might want. And for me, it's probably wine and cheese. I said that quietly with embarrassment, but that's probably the absolute truth. Is knowing that and actually that that need of needing to know where to buy. How do I get like in China? How do I get good wine? It's hard to find imported wine and for a good price. And there was a teacher at my school who had a friend who was a librarian at another school, and they had worked together in Colombia at some stage, right? And that librarian had a contact on WeChat who sold wine on Wednesday nights. This person was like a wine supplier for restaurants, and he would have overflow extra wine. And so on Wednesdays, he would do these like crash sales. And it ended up being, so just by trying to find out where do I find wine, I ended up having this whole activity where I got on and you start at 6 p.m. and you see the stuff float through and you start sending messages in.
What's his
And
phone number? I want his WeChat right now.
you got to be in China to get it. Is the hard part.
I'm not in
Yeah.
China.
I really miss it. But a lot of people on that group were teachers from all over China, and you start making connections. And through that, I ended up joining a group about whiskey because I thought, oh, I'll learn. I've always wanted to learn like what are the nuances of whiskey. So I started going to these social things every month and learning about whiskey. And then I ended up investing in a whiskey distillery that started in China, and that started a whole other social group. So I love that question because just by having that one thing, that opened up a whole other avenue for me of a social life that I didn't know I would get.
Well, that's a take on the question was really just three things that make you comfortable, but yours, that last one, really opens up social avenues, which I didn't even think about that way. Go ahead, JP.
Well, I was going to tell my own embarrassing story because
Oh, do tell.
when I first went to Oman for a weekend because the school was wanting to hire me, and I wasn't convinced because I'd never been to the Middle East. I was in Turkey at the time. And so it was just a couple hour flight, and they paid for it, and they put me up at a hotel, and they said, just come and see our country in Oman and Muscat. And so I did for a weekend. It didn't take me any extra time off work. Like, I was really relating to you when you were talking about, when you're recruiting, you have to be teaching all the time. You can't take any time off. So I got there, and they had these two parents that were going to drive me around all over the city, showing me whatever I wanted. They didn't pick me up at the airport, but when I got with them, they said, what do you want to see? And I said, can I see the inside of a grocery store? They were like, sure. And they thought it was really weird. Like, what is the first thing this woman's asking for? And it's a grocery store. And specifically, I went to the cheese aisle. I wanted to see what kind of cheese they had, because it can tell you a lot about a culture. And we happened to go to a French supermarket chain that's Carrefour. And then we went there, and it was just amazing. And it was stuff that I hadn't seen in Istanbul, and we're that much closer to France. So that's kind of when it convinced me, like, okay, I can definitely move here because they have the things that I'm familiar with. It was...
Yeah.
After carrying this stuff like ranch dressing from Hidden Valley Ranch Dressing, carrying this in a suitcase for months or years, now I could just buy it in a grocery store. Are you kidding me? That, to me, really helped.
Yeah, it's funny, but it is absolutely true. Those are the things that matter. I mean, it's Maslow's
Creature
hierarchy,
comforts.
I suppose, but absolutely true. And the ranch dressing.
Matt Judd hierarchy were in Venezuela. Remember, Emily, that Matt and Stacy would go home to the States. They come back with a suitcase full of granola bars, right?
And cereal.
And all their cereal, yes. And I was packing up like electronics and stuff, but they're on their comfort foods, and it really means a lot. I mean, I just go right to the bacon section when I go to other grocery stores in other countries now, but that's just another story for another time.
I filled my suitcases with coffee and razors, I think.
Yeah. So we have another question for you, Emily. Do you have any, in all of your travels, do you have any safe, G-rated kind of police or customs stories?
Probably.
Yeah, take a moment to think about it.
When you say safe or G-rated police or customs stories, are you just thinking like where you're like,
I don't want to get you in trouble. That's all. It was something
we
you can
don't
say
want-
on the air. We all have the other ones.
We all have the ones that we would not rather tell.
The one I like to share is because when you're overseas, you start crossing all these personal lines that you felt like you would never cross. And for me, it was handing my passport over to somebody, right? Like, I never thought I would ever let go. Like, when you leave the States, they tell you, like, never let go of your passport, never let it out of your sight, and it's really important. But then, and it is, I'm not saying it isn't, but I crossed that boundary in a crazy way. And I remember feeling like, oh my gosh, I have just either done the stupidest thing or this is going to work out okay. We were in Venezuela, and it was very difficult to get flights out at that time. I can't remember. I think you were gone already, Greg. And my spouse at the time did not have a visa to stay with me because he didn't. When I got the job, I wasn't married or anything, and so we had to leave the country quite often because he just was on a visitor's visa. So he was there legally, but couldn't stay longer than a certain period of time. And we were getting really close to that period of time when we needed to leave, but we couldn't get flights. We just couldn't get a flight booked. And I know a guy, right? I know somebody who knows a guy. And they got us in touch with somebody who was going to get us onto a plane to Trinidad. And this person had contacts with an airline, and he was going to pay them cash, literally behind the counter. Like, he was going to go behind the counter and talk to them and hand them and get us these seats on a plane. And we didn't know. We were in Caracas, and that's far away from where we lived. And I got text messages with the picture of the guy. This is the guy, this is his name. You go stand on this wall. And so they're telling us, go stand on this wall and wait there, and you're going to give him your passports and $150 in US cash each.
Oh my God, that's way outside my comfort zone.
So
Holy
Whoa,
far,
cow.
yeah.
yeah.
And here we were, like, we can't stay in the country because if we stay too long and try to leave, then he could get in trouble, and then it'd be even worse, right? So we gave him our passports and a bunch of cash. And he said, stay right here. And I thought, no, I need to be able to see you. And he goes, do not. And I texted my friend really quickly saying, he's telling us to stay put and he's going to walk away with our passports. And she said, you need to trust him.
Wow.
Just if you watch him, people are going to notice, and you can't do that. And so I stayed put. He went out, he bought our plane tickets, and it was actually at the end of the day, I think it was all a legal transaction, right? He purchased plane tickets on our behalf like a travel agent. The only thing that was wrong with that whole situation is that the airline people were getting more money for those tickets, selling them that way, than they were just selling them to the public naturally. And so I think that was, in the end of the day, I think that's what was wrong with that whole picture. But I don't think I'll ever hand my passport over again, because the minute I did it, I just felt like I can't do this. And it felt wrong. And it definitely, I never knew that you would feel like a physical pain when you cross that sort of line that you hold in yourself. And I did, I felt it. It was painful.
It's a lot different than giving your passport to our school head that takes all of our passports at one time, with a guard that, an armed guy that takes it to the embassy and brings them all back. That's a big different story. You didn't, like, she was texting you pictures of this guy saying, this is the guy you need to
Shady
look
guy.
for.
Yeah.
Stand at this wall at this time. It's like
Oh
a
my
Jason
gosh.
Bourne episode, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Piggybacking on this, I had a moment where I was leaving Oman. So I was leaving Oman after being there 7 years. And my very trusted, he became a friend. My trusted friend, the Omani, who worked at our school, and his job was all the paperwork. That he was one Omani working for our school with the visas and everything. And his job at the end of a contract was to make sure that we left with everything cleared and everything okay. And this is a man I've known for 7 years. I, in fact, transferred over my car to him in his name so that he could sell it, because it was happening. The sale was happening after I was leaving. And so, I trusted him with thousands of dollars of a car. He took my passport and went behind a door, and I was just feeling so freaked out, because here I am at the airport. I know I have to leave in, 3 hours or 2 hours before my flight, and he has just disappeared behind a door with my passport. Like, it's the craziest thing. And I can only imagine now that's a person I know and trust. You handed it over to a virtual stranger.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the passport is one of those vital pieces of documents that we know it as an international teacher. You have your number memorized, your dates memorized in there. Other people in our home countries know their driver's license, but I don't know how. I know my passport number by heart. We've had to fill it
Right.
out so many times, right?
Yep.
Well,
And
listen,
the expiry date and all that.
we've talked about a lot of stuff, and I think we're right up about that time, Emily. I was wondering if we have, after all this discussion, do you have a few final words for our listeners? Any final advice or final thoughts?
That's a good one. I think that this podcast probably says it all, which is talk to people, and do it. Go overseas. Everybody has a different kind of comfort zone. Stretch out of that a little bit, and what it's going to look like for you is different from other people, but talk to everyone you can and listen to this podcast. You'll get a lot of words of wisdom and encouragement. You never know what stories will stay in your mind you'll be reminded of as you have your own experiences. But nobody's stretch out of the comfort zone isn't important, right? And everyone's is different. It you may think yours is small compared to somebody else's, but it's huge for you, and that's good. I don't know. I just think it's really worth it, and it's worth being a part of a community that will talk with you and share.
Might we say it's the best kept secret in education? Might we
Yeah.
just say that?
Yeah, absolutely.
International teaching, the best kept secret in education at www.amazon.com by Mr. Gregory Lemoyne.
Yeah, that's
That's right. Congratulations, Craig.
Thank you so much, Emily and JP, for being on this episode. It's been a lot of fun. So I'd like to say goodbye to JP in Mexico. Thank you so much, Emily Cave, representing heads of school all over the world. I want to remind our listeners, if you're ever in China and you need some wine, she's got the WhatsApp guy for you if you need it, or the WeChat guy, right?
That's right.
Got the WeChat contact.
We will see you next episode. Thank you.